Welcome to the Membership Guys podcast. Kick-ass advice and tips for membership site owners.
Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me for episode 107 of the Membership Guys podcast. I'm your host, Mike Morrison, one half of the Membership Guys, and this is the place to be for proven practical tips and advice on growing a successful membership website. Today, I've got a very, very special show lined up for you. I'm speaking to Grant Baldwin from the speakerlab.com all about how you can grow a business and grow a membership site around public speaking. Now, Grant is someone who I've followed for a while. I listen to his podcast. I love the training and the resources and stuff that he puts out over at thespeakerlab.com. And I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to not only hang out with Grant a few months ago at Chris Ducker's Tropical Think Tank event, but also to see him in action and to get the benefit of his advice and his insights into public speaking in terms of the actual performance side and delivering presentations, but also more importantly, the business side of things, because I don't think that's something that enough people talk about. It's all well and good being a great public speaker, but how do you actually weave that into your business? How do you get paid for speaking? How do you use it as a platform to promote your business, to promote your membership site? That's the sort of stuff that Grant talks about. And it was great to get the chance to chat to Grant for this show and really dive into that side of things too. But before we get into my conversation with Grant, I just want to take this opportunity to remind you that the Membership Guys podcast is brought to you by membersiteacademy.com, the #1 training community for membership site owners. Whatever stage you're at in your membership journey, whether you're playing with your idea and you're trying to flesh out what your membership will look like, whether you're actually hands deep in the tech side of things and you're building your site, coming up to your launch, running it, growing it, scaling it, we've got you covered inside membersiteacademy.com with an extensive training library that covers everything you need for every stage of your membership, as well as member-only perks, regular live mastermind calls, expert workshops, and of course an active, supportive community where you can ask questions and get answers not only from myself and from Callie, but also from other experienced membership site owners who have been exactly where you are and can help you along your way. So if you're serious about growing a successful membership site, head on over to membersiteacademy.com. But of course, before you do that, you're going to want to listen to my interview with Grant. So let's head on right now into my conversation about public speaking with Grant Baldwin. My guest today has spoken at hundreds of events around the world and is not only an accomplished public speaker, but has taken that experience and used it to teach others how to build a successful business around speaking through his podcast and the training that he provides at thespeakerlab.com. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome to the Membership Guys podcast, Mr. Grant Baldwin.
It is an honor and delight to hang out with you, my friend. How are you today?
I am good. The sun is actually shining here for maybe the third time this year, so I'm feeling good.
We may have traded for some UK weather because it's been raining here the past few days.
Well, we've got Wimbledon going on here at the minute, the big tennis thing, and so we've been seeing this incredible weather down in London on our TVs, and it's been storm weather up here for the whole duration. So it's nice to actually get a little bit of crack of sun. It's awesome.
Nice, very cool.
All right, so Grant Baldwin, big time speaker, lots of events, all that sort of stuff. What drew you into public speaking as a career? You know, when you see so many things out there saying public speaking is consistently at the top of people's lists of their biggest fears. Right. 90% of people saying that they fear public speaking more than death. Are you just a bit nuts, or you know, is there something specific that attracted you to doing this as a business?
Yeah, I to backtrack a little bit, just to give you some context on my story. So growing up, I was really involved in my local church and had a couple opportunities to speak there, just like, you know, a Sunday school class type of thing, you know, to some peers in high school. And I just always really enjoyed it. You know, it's one of those things that I still get nervous whenever I speak, and it's still something that's still slightly terrifying, and you're kind of walking a tightrope with no net below you. But there's also something kind of fun about that, and something that feels like there's that whenever you're able to really draw an audience in, and you're able just to capture their attention, and you're able to teach them, encourage them, inspire them, and you see them nodding and they're getting it, or you see them laughing and you have them, or you see those moments where you get really, really quiet and you just pause and you can just tell that they're right there with you. There's something really, really powerful and effective about speaking. And I think maybe even for all of us, we've all had those speakers that we've heard before that we remember something that they said. We may not remember anything of the whole talk that they gave, but there's a line or two that really had this huge pivotal impact in our lives that have affected us for years and years and years. And so speaking, it really gives the opportunity to do that. So after high school, I actually went to Bible college. I was a youth pastor for a little bit, worked at a local church, was doing a lot of speaking in that setting, primarily to high school students, would speak from time to time on the weekends in big church. And I just always really enjoyed speaking. I felt like I was decent at it. I felt like there might be something there. So I met a couple guys who were speakers, and they were doing it more on a full-time basis and setting. And for a while, I just didn't realize like that was a thing, like most people don't, you see someone speak and you're like, oh, they did that one time and that was it. But there's a lot of people that this is how they make their living, is they speak professionally. They speak all over, all over their area, region, or all over the world. And so I decided that's really what I wanted to do. So that's what I did for the next several years. Was I was speaking full time. I'd do 50, 60, 70 events a year, all over primarily the US, and really enjoyed it. Again, felt like I was decent at it, and got to a point where there's a lot of people that were saying, I want to do that. I want to, maybe I don't want to do 70 events, but I'd love to do, 5 events or 10 events, or maybe I want to do 70 events or 100 events. And I just have no idea where to begin. So that's when we started thespeakerlab.com. And that's where we teach people more the business of speaking. How do you actually find and book speaking engagements? So it's a bit of crazy, but also a lot of fun being on stage.
So when you made that transition and that penny drop that this is actually something people do for a living, was there anything about transitioning into being a full-time speaker that took you by surprise, or maybe, perhaps you had a preconception about what it would be like that turned out to be very different?
Well, I mean, one of the challenges with speaking, a couple things. Like, one is that from a sales perspective and just like from a financial perspective, is you can get paid really, really well to speak. It's not unrealistic to get paid several $1,000s to speak, which is great. But the sales cycle and the just kind of the cash flow cycle can be a long time, because most events book usually 3 to 6 months out, but a lot of them, the bigger the event, they book 6 to 9 months or 6 to 12 months out. So, and a lot of times, let's say an organization puts on a conference or an event once a year, they're probably only looking for speakers once a year. They're looking at speakers for a couple of weeks, and that's it. So, if they book speakers in June and you talk to them in July, they're like, well, we already booked a speaker, so check back with us at a year from now. Yeah. It's just a long sales cycle. So it can take a little bit just to get some traction and get going. So I found personally, like, speaking is very much a momentum game, that the more you're speaking, the easier it is to book gigs. Because it's a lot of word of mouth. It's a lot of referrals. I can tell you several stories of events where I spoke at something and I booked something 5 years later that just some random someone saw me in the audience, or someone that was helping to plan that event, transitioned to a different role at a different company or a different place. And then they're looking for a speaker and somehow they magically remembered my name. And, some of those things that it takes a while to get going. And so a lot of early on, you're spreading a bunch of seed and you're staring at the dirt, just waiting for anything to emerge. And so it just takes time. I think that's where a lot of speakers early on can get discouraged and frustrated and want to quit is, I put up my website and I emailed a couple people and I didn't get any response, or they're not looking for a speaker right now. And so I just give up. And the reality is, like, finding and booking speaking engagements isn't rocket science. It just takes work. And it's not, I don't think it's any different than any other business. We were, you and I have talked a lot about membership sites, and, putting together a membership site isn't rocket science, but it's still work. Like, you still have to do the work, and you still have to continue doing the work ongoing. It's not a set it and forget it type of thing. So I think it's the same thing that's true with speaking, that the people that are really successful as speakers are the ones that are really making it a priority in their business and really putting in the work and the effort.
So do you think it is very much something you have to make that conscious decision that, yes, I want to be a gigging pro speaker on the circuit and I'm going all in? can you kind of have one foot in and be that kind of non-committal, well, I'll speak if people ask me to speak, or I'll do 2 or 3 gigs every now and then. I've got to be honest, that's where I am.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, well, I'm not going to chase it, but if someone wants me to speak, I'll speak and I'll enjoy it. But then there are some days where at the same time you're looking at it and you're thinking, well, why am I not booked for this lineup of 20 events this year? So can you have that kind of casual approach to it, or do you really need to go all guns blazing?
Well, I mean, a lot of it, one of the nice things about speaking is that there's no right or wrong way to do it, So like I was saying, I was doing, 60, 70 events a year, and that worked for me. Whereas I know plenty of people who do far less, and I know plenty of people who do far more. So there's not like, oh, that person's doing it the correct way. You do what makes sense to you. And so there's some speakers that I know who are, for many, many years, I was a speaker who happened to also maybe have a book or happen to also do something else on the side. But there's plenty of people I know who, in your case, you primarily run and teach about membership sites, and you also happen to speak. So speaking is not the primary thing that you do. And so therefore it's not the primary, you're not getting it like primary energy and time. It's a very, very secondary thing. The danger though is when people are making speaking a very secondary, or further down the list type of priority, but then they're expecting, they're expecting I'm going to do full-time 20, 30, 40 gig. Why aren't people lining up to hire me and book me? Like, it just doesn't. And again, that's not exclusive to speaking. That's with anything. Like, I can't say like, oh man, I went to the gym one time and I'm not ripped. Like, well, yeah, because it's not a priority. It's just kind of, if you're just giving it a half effort at best, then don't expect like full results from it. So all that to say, again, there's no right or wrong way to do speaking. And so there's some speakers that I know, and largely what I did was speaking primarily to, I go speak, I collect a check, and that's kind of the end of the transaction. But one of the great things for, especially like online entrepreneurs, is speaking can be a good additional, financial revenue stream, but it can also be great for a variety of reasons. So speaking can work really, really well to build credibility. Any conference or event that we all attend or have been to, anybody that's a speaker, we all internally, we ascribe some type of credibility or prestige to that person just because they got a freaking speaker thing on their badge, So I think that can work really well. It can work really well for networking and connecting with other speakers. Oftentimes those are other influencers that maybe you want to meet or connect with. And again, because we ascribe some type of credibility to that person that's a speaker, if you're also a speaker, then that person's more willing to connect with you or chat with you in this context where, they're busy, or there's a lot of people that may be pulling at their attention. So being a speaker can work really well from that standpoint. Being a speaker can work well if, let's say, you want to go to a conference or an event, and let's say it's a free event, but it's a conference that you wanted to attend anyway. And so they're willing to cover either some of your travel, or they're not going to charge you to attend the event. So let's say it's it's $1,000 ticket to attend this conference, but you're speaking, so they're not going to charge you anything. Well, that's a win. There's value in that for you. The other big thing, especially for online entrepreneurs, is speaking can work really well as a means to sell whatever your product or service is, depending on the context and the setting. But I'll give you an example. One of the students that we work with, he speaks for free, and he uses it primarily as lead generation for his coaching business. And so on paper, on the surface, you'd look at it and be like, oh, you speak for free, you're not a real speaker, that doesn't count. But he used speaking last year to generate $372,000 in coaching business. So like speaking drives his entire coaching business. So all that to say, like, you can use speaking to drive business to your membership site, to your selling your book, consulting, coaching, any type of product or service that you have, because the nature of speaking is, someone sees you speak and you speak for 30, 45, 60 minutes, and then that's it. There's only so much that you can cover. There's only so much you can get into, but there's always people that are going to be like, I want more from you, whether that's a product or service. And so speaking can work really well as just a lead generation for whatever the other thing is that you offer. So again, all that to say, there's no right or wrong way to do speaking, but just know that if you want bigger results, you're going to have to put in bigger effort.
Yeah, and it's in what you're saying there, it definitely rings true, because I know for myself, I know that most of the time, if I'm speaking somewhere, I'm not going to get a whole bunch of people from the audience sign up, because our membership is very much something you joined when you are dedicated to setting out to create and grow a membership, or if you're an existing membership site owner. And so that's usually not going to be everyone. Yes, raising the awareness, putting it on the radar of people is important, but I don't go there for that final reason you mentioned there of actually promoting other services and all that sort of stuff. The main things are the credibility factor and connecting with other speakers. I'm not even bothered about making the money from it because there's other stuff we do that we could make more for the amount of time that goes into prep. So I think, yeah, it definitely goes to show that actually the motivations behind it can all be very different.
Well, and like as another quick example, like sometimes it makes sense to go speak at an event. Just a lot of people like the idea of travel. And so, you and I spoke at an event, Chris Ducker's event in the Philippines, and part of it was Chris is a friend of both of ours, and I wanted to support him, but also it's like, oh, it's a cool place to go. I've never been to the Philippines. My wife came, and Callie came with you, so it was an opportunity for us to, all hang out, meet other people, but also just be in a cool place, that we wouldn't have otherwise maybe been able to visit or see.
Yeah, that's the thing. Callie's asked me a few times since, like, do you think we'd ever go back to the Philippines? Like, you never actually have any calls, really, outside of family or a speaking event like that to actually go through. But it was an amazing resort and an amazing place that you wouldn't get the opportunity to go to otherwise. And same for me coming over to the US. Right. Like, I'll quite happily just be put on a panel somewhere where, I don't really have to do any work because it means I get to go over to San Diego again and I get to hang out there and I get to catch up with friends and stuff. So yeah, it's more just a means to travel. For me, if you can roll that into obviously, monetizing it in other ways or ticking whatever other boxes that you have, then that's cool. So obviously, the end goal isn't necessarily to get paid as a speaker, but presumably just find a way in which speaking delivers value to you and to your other objectives.
Right. And again, to just kind of piggyback on the, you mentioned like most people aren't going to sit in one of your sessions and immediately sign up for a membership, Site Academy. Yeah. They're intrigued, they're interested, they want more, but maybe it's just not hot on their radar right now. But one of the things that works really well from a speaking perspective is it's very similar to an online experience of someone comes to your stuff. I'm not interested right now, but I'm willing to sign up for this free lead magnet. And that starts the conversation and that builds a relationship. So speaking can work really well from that standpoint of just helping to build your email list. I kick myself personally because I did a lot of speaking before I kind of discovered this online space. And so I spoke to literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that I never did anything to build that email list, really. Another thing, and nothing like super intentional. It was more just kind of, passive type stuff. Whereas I'm going now, like, dang, that's a lot of like captive, interesting, or people that are interested and engaged in what it is that you have to say, I'm sure would love to hear, more long term. Yeah. So whether that's some type of, text to opt in type, like a lead digits type of tool, something like that, where the audience wants more from it. And it can be something as simple as some type of specific lead magnet that related to what you're talking about. Or, if you're someone that uses slides that you are just saying, hey, if you just want a copy of my slides, just text, slides to this number and you'll get a copy of my slides and I'll follow up with you on just some other, other things that I think may be of value to you. So you can really just start a relationship with people in an audience that then can continue in an online setting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the main places where we get a lot of our members coming from is our podcast. So I was on a panel with Amy and Shailene Johnson, and we were talking about podcasting. So it wasn't about memberships; it was about using a podcast to promote and to sell a product. And for the entire talk, our podcast artwork for the three of us was up on the slide behind us. Yeah. And when I got back to the hotel room and looked at my stats, it's just that huge spike. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I heard the beginning of one of my podcast episodes, the jingle playing in the audience from somebody checking it out. And this is sitting on a panel with two people, people weren't in that room to see me. Yeah. But just having that little presence on the screen, and that no doubt will have actually turned into leads and to sales without, in an environment where we're actually putting up a lead magnet. This is a social media marketing world where it is no promo whatsoever.
Yeah.
But still, we'll have got some leads and we'll have built
But
our audience just
and
from
again,
that.
you look at that example right there, that you were on a panel with two other big name online entrepreneurs / podcasters, and all of a sudden there's a certain amount of credibility that's associated with you. Dang, like, wow, Mike's on a panel with these two. Wow, Shalene and Nate, that's impressive, right? So now all of a sudden, by nature of you just being on that panel with them or speaking at the same event as them, or a lot of people like to call it, sharing the stage or whatever you want to call it. There's a certain amount of credibility that you piggyback on because of that. So speaking can work really well from that standpoint.
Oh, without doubt. Now, I've seen, as I'm sure you have, a lot of speakers who were great at the actual speaking side of things, the presentation and the performance side, but they weren't really saying much at all. Similarly, I've also seen a lot of presentations where the content was great, but it was just so poorly delivered.
Yeah. When
it comes to that balance of style versus substance, is one more important than the other?
Dude, that's a good question. I mean, I think there definitely is. You have to have some type of balance there. And I think that, the reality is that you can go both ways. I tend to lean toward the presentation style, because even if the topic is somewhat, boring or nothing fancy or sexy, I think a good communicator keeps it interesting and keeps it engaging. The other thing to remember with speaking is that, for better or worse, this is the reality of it, is that you're going to put hours and hours and hours into a really solid presentation, and you're going to give that presentation for 45, 60 minutes, and the audience is going to remember a couple of things that you said, maybe at best.
Yeah.
A week from then, they're going to remember one line that you said, and a month from then, they're not going to remember a single thing that you said, which is super frustrating and discouraging, right? So all that to say, like, let's say that you have 60 minutes of just jam-packed, tons of really, really practical, strong content. A month from now, most people are going to forget a lot of that. But if you've got a couple of key points that you can really, really hammer on, that you can really keep coming back to as just some anchor content, that can be something that sticks a little bit more long term. So again, I think it's not necessarily one's better than the other in terms of style versus substance. I think you absolutely have to have both. Most people are probably better at one than the other. Most people are probably, there's, like you said, some people that are really good at the content side, but they suck on delivering, and some people that they're great on stage, they got a lot of charisma, but they're just not good at developing the content. And so, ideally you want to have both. And so if you have one but not the other, then you kind of know where you need to spend more of your time. So I know for me personally, I know that naturally I feel very comfortable on stage. So I have to work more on the content side. I have to really spend the time to think through what's the best way to deliver this content so that it resonates, it clicks, and people take action on it and do something with it. Whereas other people may be amazingly good on the content, but they're just not, they don't have the stage experience, or they're not super comfortable, and they need to spend more time there. So I think it's important just for anybody just to really identify where you are best and where you also struggle, so that you are able to improve on those areas. But at the same time, make sure you're playing to your strengths.
Yeah, and I suppose if you identify, there's training you can get on whichever areas you're weakest. I've seen a lot of people talking about, if you're going to be doing any sort of public speaking or something like that, I'll see people advocating doing like improv classes and stuff like that. If you're not comfortable with the actual on your feet performing, reacting to questions or even hecklers and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I get, people ask me sometimes like, "Hey, how, you're a decent speaker. How have you been able to become good?" And it's a large part of it is just that I've done it a lot. And so there's no it's not like I have some special gift that someone else doesn't have. It's just that if you've been on stage, close to 1,000 times in front of audiences of a couple people and audiences of thousands and thousands of people, and you've given presentations for a few minutes and some for a couple hours, and you've been in settings where the power goes out, the fire alarm goes off, people are getting up and walking out, and you've been in all those settings and you've been like war torn, like, then naturally you should be getting better. You should be improving, So, and I think that's the case with anything. How do you become a better podcaster? You podcast. How do you become a better writer? You write. How do you become a better speaker? You speak. And so the more you do it, the more comfortable you start to feel, and the more experience that you have in that, and also the more credibility you start to earn from that thing.
Yeah, I suppose it's just perseverance then.
Sure.
And not allowing those bad experiences to stop you in your tracks. I remember one of the first times I did a presentation to a room full of business people, and I was maybe 22, 23 in a room where I'd be lucky if anyone there was less than double my age, all very serious, all very buttoned down. And I'd overthought this presentation just to supernatural levels. It was shockingly, like, it was basically just strings of horrendous jokes and meandering anecdotes that I'd overprocessed to a point where they made sense to literally nobody other than me. And I had props. Like, I had like a grocery bag of props. Like, this is where it ended up. It was for a 15-minute talk on 10 mistakes with online marketing, and I had this kit of just nonsensical props.
Yeah.
And about 5 minutes in, like, it was just clear that it wasn't working. And there was that moment in my head where I'm kind of like, okay, I could just wrap this up and bail and just melt, or kind of own it. And I actually had to stop and say, this is actually like really crap, isn't it? Should I just like ditch all
how
of
did the
this?
audience respond?
They laughed.
Yeah.
Like, for the first time. They didn't laugh at any of the planned jokes, but they laughed at that and they eased up. And when they did, I relaxed a bit more and actually started talking about what I wanted to talk about.
I think that's such a great example of, and this is a great speaking lesson, is that the audience takes their cues from the speaker. Meaning that if the speaker is uncomfortable or awkward or clunky or anything like that, if you can tell they're nervous, it makes the audience uncomfortable. Whereas if the speaker's relaxed, they're having fun, then the audience chills out and they have fun. If something happens in the room, a cell phone goes off, and all of a sudden the speaker is just like, you can tell, like, oh my gosh, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle it. If they're freaking out, then the audience feels that and they start to freak out as well. But if the speaker makes a joke about it and they don't think it's a big deal, then the audience is like, well, if it's not a big deal to you and you get the microphone, then it's not a big deal to me as an audience member. So exactly the case of in your situation, if you're acknowledging this elephant in the room that, like, does this feel awkward to anybody else right now? And everybody else loosens up because you just loosened up, then it just changes the dynamic of the room. And so that's definitely one of the powerful things of being a speaker, is that the audience, remember, sometimes we feel like it's this, as a speaker, you are speaking to this group of people that hate you or want you to fail. And that's just not the case. You are one human talking to a group of other humans, and they want you to do well. Like, they don't want to waste their time sitting there listening to someone boring. And so if it's awkward and all of a sudden, the speaker acknowledges that it's awkward, that creates an amazing moment for the entire room, for everyone to really lock in. Because again, you're just acknowledging a human moment that, I'm doing my best here, and this is freaking hard. And I think most people realize, like, being on stage is difficult and it is tough. And so when someone is struggling and they acknowledge they're struggling, like, the audience is like, I totally see how that you may be struggling, one, but two, how that is. Like, we've all been up there, and it is really hard to do what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point there as well, of remembering that these guys are not sitting there waiting for you to fail.
Right.
And I was at an event recently where you kind of saw that in action. They kind of interspersed the pro speakers with kind of first time, less experienced speakers for essentially like 10-minute kind of, they called them lightning talks.
Yeah.
And one of the speakers for that was doing very well, hit a point where you could just see immediately the expression changed, mind went blank.
Yeah.
And she kind of froze.
Yeah.
And the audience were just fantastic, cheering, whooping, kind of cheering her on. And that perked her back up, and she found her place, and she carried on again. And, I suppose in that moment, you're probably thinking, oh my God, if I don't say anything, these guys are going to boo and heckle and all that. So to actually realize, that they want me to do well, even if purely selfishly, because they want to get something from your talk. So they're not waiting for you to fail.
Right. Another point on that is, when you're in a spot and you kind of like lose your place or you forget what you're supposed to say next, just kind of taking a moment to gather yourself, or even just like you said, kind of acknowledging it. There's been times where I've done that before, where I'm speaking on something and I just draw a blank, and you just have that moment of brain fart in front of the audience. Remember, if it's no big deal to you, then it's no big deal to the audience. So if you even just say, like, I'm sorry, what was I talking about just now? Like the audience finds humor in that moment that's just real and authentic, The other thing I would say on that is whenever you are working on your presentation and talk and you're delivering it, sometimes we feel like we have to deliver this script, like it's this manuscript you have to nail word for word. The reality is, like, if you forget your place, or if you forget to tell a story, or if you do things out of order, the audience has no clue. It's not like they're following along in the manuscript and they're like, oh, whoa, you skipped a line. Like, they don't know. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're like, for example, if you're singing a song that everybody knows, if you're singing the national anthem, or if you're singing some pop song that everybody knows, and you screw up the lyrics, everybody knows. But if you forget you lose your place in a talk and you skip something or you do things out of order, in your mind, you may be like, oh no, I forgot it. I missed it. The audience has no clue. So again, if it's no big deal to you, it's no big deal to them.
So let's talk a bit about actually preparing what you're going to talk about. If someone is quite early on, if they haven't yet delivered the same talk enough times to kind of refine it, is there kind of a common framework or structure to what you would say would make for a great presentation that people can start out with?
Yeah, again, one of the great things with speaking is there is no right or wrong way to do it. So I've seen some talks that are, there's the standard, intro, 3 points, closing, and that works really, really well. Audiences are used to that. Some where it's just kind of 1 point. Some that's just basically a story that's told, and there's a couple points that are woven in throughout that. So all that to say, there's no right or wrong way to do it. What I would tend to recommend though is really you want to begin with the end in mind. You've finished the presentation, and the audience is going to forget 90+% of what it is that you just talked about. But what's the one thing that you really want them to get? What's the one thing that you're just like, this is the anchor. If you get nothing else, make sure you get this. And typically that should be some type of really tight, concise line. Something along the lines of something that's tweetable, right? Those moments where you've been sitting in a talk and someone says something, you're like, oh, dang, I got to write that down, or I got to tweet that. That's really what you want, is that type of anchor line. And you're really starting to build your talk from that. So beginning with the end in mind, here's where I know the talk is going, and then you can kind of reverse engineer of what else you want to cover. So one of the best ways to do that is just to start by brainstorming the heck out of the topic. So what I would do is I'd take, where you want to go with the talk, and then from there, just take 15 minutes and brainstorm on a piece of paper, on a Word document, on a whiteboard, anything and Post-it notes, anything and everything you can think of related to that topic. So it could be stories, it could be stats, it could be just points or lines, it could be strategies, could be tactics, could be illustrations, it could be props. I mean, anything, like no filter. I'm just brainstorming, brain dumping ideas. From there, I'm going to start to kind of see, okay, I know what my end point is. I know where the destination is. Now let's kind of pull out some of the road markers along the way that I want to make sure that I get to that lead people on that kind of logical progression of here's where I want people to end up. I got to pick it. Think of it like a road trip. Here's the destination. I got to pick everybody else up at the same place. And what's the logical path to get there? What's the place that makes sense? And you can pull some of that from what some of that brainstorming. Once you've got kind of a rough skeleton there of what the talk is going to be, then you can kind of come back and kind of flesh some of it out, where that's where you can come in and add some stories. You can add some stats, or you can add, this funny thing I want to tell, this joke that I want to tell, or this image or this video that I want to show. I want to come back and I want to show those things. I want to do that. Makes sense here, right? So working your way through with the kind of a rough skeleton outline and then starting to kind of flesh things out from there. What I tend to do, and this is just my personal preference, I tend to actually manuscript my talk out. So if I'm doing especially more of like a keynote type presentation, I will manuscript it out word for word. And going back to what we talked about earlier, remember, it's not a manuscript that you have to know verbatim. It's not like I'm trying to remember this word for word. But the point of me writing it down is to really think through the best possible way to tell that. So, for example, if you were to ask me, Grant, tell me about when you proposed to your wife. Well, I can give you a 30-second version of that right now, just off the top of my head. But I bet if I sat down for 20 minutes and really thought about all the details of that, what were the emotions, what was said, what was the setting, what did we do right after, who did we call, all of those things, I bet it would be a much better story, just because I put the time time into it, right? And so that's really what you're trying to do, is you're sitting down and you're not creating this manuscript that you're handcuffed to, but you're just creating, I'm really thinking through what's the best possible way to tell this story or to make this point. And even just thinking through, introductions and transitions. So, I just told this story and now I need to get from point A to point B. What's the best logical way to do that? Rather than just kind of winging it or making it up on the spot, really thinking those pieces through. So I think then the point where most speakers kind of really differentiate themselves is the amount of practice and preparation that you put into it. So at that point, remember, I'm not trying to memorize a script or something. I'm really trying to know basically the I would say almost like the heart of the message. I really want to spend a lot of time and several hours oftentimes going through the material, and I'll manuscript it out, I'll print it out, and I'll just go page by page by page, just knowing what comes next. Because the more I internalize it, the more I really know the content, then the easier it is to be more fully present with the audience. Because I think we've all seen speakers who they're so deep in their own head that they're just thinking about the next line of their script that anything can throw them off. But I want to make sure I know my content, and like right now, we're talking and we're kind of riffing on some stuff. And so if something happens in the moment that throws either of us off, it's not a big deal, and you just pick back up where you left off. But if you're just like, I have to say everything perfect, and I'm so robotic, and I said this line, and now I have to take 3 steps to the left, and I have to raise my right hand, and I have, all of that stuff, and it's just like, it just ruins you're a robot speaking to people, not a human speaking to people. So spending the time to really practice it, go over it, and just know the material. I think that really makes a massive difference. And I promise you, the best speakers in the world, they don't just get up and wing it. They don't just write 3 points down on a napkin right before they go up and just kind of, I'll just make it up and kind of riff on things. They really spend the time to know their material, know the best possible way to deliver it, and they spend a ton of time learning it and going over it. So I know for me, if I'm doing a new talk, I'll spend hours pacing my office, pacing a hotel room, pacing backstage, just talking to myself. And I look crazy and I look ridiculous. But that really makes a huge, huge difference by the time you get on stage. And I've told you this publicly and privately. The time I saw you speak at Chris Ducker's event, Tropical Think Tank, you could tell you spent a massive amount of time prepping and practicing and rehearsing it and going over it. And it shows. It makes a huge difference versus another speaker who may just get up and just kind of wing it. So one other thought I'll end on with this is all of this means that you spend a lot of time on a talk. So one thing I would recommend for speakers, if you're going to do any amount of speaking on a regular basis, I think it's really important to try as best as possible, as long as it's different audiences, to do the same talk. Yeah. So the best speakers in the world, they don't have 54 talks that they give. Each time they get booked to speak, they don't, what do you want me to talk about? I'll just work on something from scratch, because it takes so much freaking time. But they do the same talk every time. It's like when you go to, your favorite restaurant, they don't just cook anything and everything. It's like, no, we cook this one thing we're insanely good at. And that's probably why you came here today. And so that's what you want to do. You want to get to that point where you've got 1, 2, maybe 3 talks that you give. And those are the 3 talks that you give. You might tweak a few little things, depending on the audience, but 90% of it is going to be the same, because that's what works. You're not playing with the recipe each time just because you feel like you need to. No, this works really, really well. And so that's what you want to come back to on a regular basis. So have a couple of those talks that you do, but don't do like this brand new custom from scratch talk every single time you speak, because that's what takes so much time. And it's just kind of, you're giving your best effort of what you think the talk's going to be, but the more you give it, the better the talk becomes.
Yeah, when you've got 2 or 3 of those, that's your product then, isn't it? Totally. That's what you're going out there and selling, as opposed to just trying to sell someone on you and then having to, negotiate and agree what you're going to talk about. It makes it so much easier for event organizers as well, because they can just look at it and say, okay, well, I definitely want somebody to speak about this, so let's go for that. Right. Or it helps, you not get your time wasted in or end up speaking about something that you don't actually want to talk about or what have you, because they can quite just as quickly exclude you from their plans based on, okay, well, actually, we've already got someone talking about these things, so let's not bother.
Yeah, I mean, it's like one of the worst things a speaker can say is if like an event organizer reaches out to you and says, "What do you speak about?" Don't say, "What do you want me to speak about?" Or "I can speak about anything. I can speak about everything." No, you can't. And like you said, when you speak about things that you know and that you're passionate about and that you're really good at, it's a heck of a lot easier for you, and it makes for a better presentation. Like if you get up there and you don't know what you're talking about, it shows and it reflects poorly on you. You don't want to do that, right? So there are times where people have asked me, "Hey, can you talk about, I don't know, some random subject or topic that I know something about, but I'm not, I don't feel necessarily qualified to talk about it." And so, I probably wouldn't be the best, but here's this person, you need to go talk with this person on this subject or topic. They just know way more about it. It'd be a much better presentation. That's where you want to be, is you want to be able to say, no. If you want this, go to that person. But if you want this, I am your go-to person for that subject or topic.
And of course, it's easier for you to do that and refer on to another person if that other person also has their 2 or 3, signature keynotes to deliver, and presumably they're going to then recommend people onto you in the future as well. So I'd imagine that a lot of that whole, well, I can talk about anything you want me to talk about, is coming from maybe desperation to pick up gigs, or trying to maybe even get booked for events that you're not really, at that level for yet. So for anyone who is early on in their journey and maybe they have that, maybe that's what's going on with them. They're just trying to get on any stage, or they're wanting to get booked on the big, several thousand audience stages, having only spoken 1 or 2 times. Like, how should they be doing it properly? What would you say are the top 3 tips or the top 3 things that someone should be doing if they're early on in their journey to becoming a professional public speaker? Yeah,
one of the things that most speakers have a really difficult time with is they don't know who they want to speak to or what they want to speak about. They just know that they want to speak. I spoke at I was on a panel, or I did something at my local community or Toastmasters or something, and it was fun, and I want to do more of that. And so I'm just looking for any and every opportunity that I can. And that's just not a good way to do it. So one of the best things that you can do early on is to get really, really clear about who you speak to and what's the problem that you can solve for that audience, right? So that you're not saying, "I speak to anybody and everybody about anything and everything," which is not true. And everybody knows that. So it's no different than if you're starting a blog or if you're starting a podcast. Well, who's your podcast for? Well, it's for humans. It's for everybody. No, it's not. Like, you have to be super specific about, this is who this podcast is for, or this is who this book is for, and this is what the book is about, and this is how it's going to help people. This is why you should read my blog, because it's for this specific thing. The more specific you can be, the better. So instead of trying to be this generalist to everybody, be really, really specific. So the more specific you can be, the easier it is to find gigs, because you've really started to narrow down what it is that you are looking for. So I'll give you an example. If you say, I want to speak to females about, resiliency in life. Well, that's great, but that's half of the world's population, right? So let's narrow that down a little bit more. Okay, I want to speak to moms. Okay, we're getting somewhere now. Okay, I want to speak to moms who are in the corporate space and they're trying to balance work and life, right? Okay, we're getting closer now. Let's take it a step further. Okay, I want to speak to moms who are realtors who are trying to balance work and life. Okay, now we've got to something very, very specific, and those are people that I can start to find. So figuring out who I want to speak to, what's the problem I can solve for them, and then the third piece there is, where do those people gather? Like, sometimes people would, I'll give you an example. I talked with a guy yesterday, and he comes from a healthcare industry. He wants to speak, and so it made sense for him to speak in the healthcare industry. So I asked him, I said, you come from the healthcare industry. What do you want to be speaking about? What's the problem that you feel like you can solve? And he said, I really want to speak to middle managers about leadership and communication. Is kind of what he landed on. And I said, cool. So you were in the healthcare industry for many, many years. Do you remember any type of events or associations or groups or gatherings or trainings in-house for middle managers about leadership and communication? He thinks about it for a second. He's like, no, I can't remember anything. Okay. What that means is That's probably not a good thing. We'd rather find what are the existing events and opportunities that are taking place that are already looking for and hiring speakers. It is a heck of a lot simpler to get booked by a conference that's already planning on hiring a speaker versus him saying, I think this is a topic that's important to you. And I think I need to convince you to not only hire or not only have an event and not only hire a speaker, but you need to hire me. That is a lot of work. That's a lot of uphill battle that you have to get to just to get a booking versus here's what's already existing in the marketplace. Here's the existing conferences. Here's the existing events. Here's the existing subjects and topics that they are being hired for, and start to figure out what's the blend between what organizations and groups are already hiring speakers for, what speakers are talking about, and with what it is that you are passionate about and what it is that you bring to the marketplace. If you start browsing around and you say, I can't find anybody that speaks on this subject or topic or anybody that speaks to this audience, I'm going to be the first. That's not a good thing when it comes to speaking. You want to find what are those existing markets where they're already used to booking speakers. They're already used to hiring speakers. They're already used to hiring speakers to talk about that subject or topic. Then it's a matter of kind of how can you differentiate yourself from them, but instead of trying to invent your own industry that you hope people start hiring speakers for. So I think just especially if you want to get paid, you really want to make sure that you're solving a problem for groups and audiences that are used to hiring speakers, that are used to bringing in speakers, and that have regular events that bring in speakers. So, for example, again, going back to you and me, both got hired to speak at Chris Ducker's event in the Philippines. It is a lot simpler to get hired or to convince Chris to hire us because he has an event. He's planning on hiring speakers versus if we went to Chris and said, hey, you know what you should do? You should host an event. And yeah, I know that that's a crap load of work, but you should host an event and you should have a bunch of speakers. Oh, by the way, I should be one of them. That sounds like a huge selling nightmare, but Chris already has an event. So it's not a huge request to say, hey, I know you have an event. I know something about your audience. Here's something that I think would be a fit for your audience. Here's how I could solve a problem that your audience has. You're providing a solution to the need that Chris already has. So it's a heck of a lot simpler for him to say yes to that and for you to get booked versus, again, trying to convince him to jump through all these hoops just so that you can book an event. So I think, again, getting really clear on who you speak to, what do you speak about, and ultimately, what's the problem that you're solving for that audience? And then third, where do those people gather? What are the actual events around the topic or subject, or where those audience members gather that you could speak to?
Yeah, I think that final point especially is so important because I think people do get carried away with this idea that they've struck gold with a concept nobody's ever thought of and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's no such thing as an original idea, and so if nobody's out there speaking about something or and same for membership, same for courses, if there isn't a membership about this one thing that you're doing, there's more likely that that's a bad sign than this golden opportunity. And you don't want to have to do that double sell of first sell them on the idea that they need someone and then have to sell them on the idea that they need you. I know there's a couple of guys from over here in the UK, fairly young guys, fairly new on the speaking scene now, but they really wanted to get booked at one of the big US events. Mm-hmm. And I think their first pass by, they went in and they said, well, we've got this approach and this perspective on content marketing that we think is unique and it's new and it's exciting, and we'd love to do a session at your event. And it went nowhere because they didn't need it. It wasn't what they were looking for. So at that same event, this conference actually did a session with the conference founders, and they do this every year, where they actually sit in a room and say, these are the topics we want covered if you want to speak here. So those guys went away, they crafted a talk around this very specific topic they knew the event was looking for, and they went back and said, you need a speaker about Twitter marketing. You need a speaker about Twitter marketing. Here is this product we've got. This is our Twitter talk. And they now take that out and do the same talk all over the place. But yeah, that's actually finding a round hole to stick your peg into, as opposed to going in and saying, "Hey guys, you ever thought about bashing a hole in here?"
Right.
Yeah, it's
one other thing I'd piggyback on, and you asked this question before and I didn't get to it, but especially if you're getting started as a speaker, and let's say you're clear on who you speak to, what you speak about, where those people gather, I think it's really important to manage your expectations. So, there may be some of those big conferences that have, 3, 4, 5,000 people there, and you're going, "Hey, I've done 2 workshops, so I think I should be on stage giving a 5,000 person keynote." Like, be realistic about what your expectations are, right? The other thing I would say along the same lines is that speaking is very much a relationship business. People do business with people they know, like, and trust. So look at it from the event planner's perspective. Whenever, let's go back to Tropical Think Tank. When Chris puts us on stage, it's a reflection on Chris. If we suck, it makes Chris look bad. Chris is in the business of not making himself look bad, right? We all are, right? So you gotta remember that it's so much more than just if you're a great speaker, but and Chris would probably say this, there's people that are great speakers, but they're horrible people off stage, or they're just not people that like you want to be around. So speaking is very much a relationship business. So I can speak to my own experience of how did I get booked to speak at Tropical Think Tank? Well, it started probably 3 years before, whenever I met Chris at an event, and he and I stayed in touch, and we'd chat from time to time, and I never asked for anything, and we'd cross paths in events here and there. Oh, and then it worked out. So it's not like this, first date, wham, bam, thank you, man. It's a long-term relationship, and, when I think they have other people that I have good friendships and relationships with that host events, and I've never made the ask, but I will at some point when I know that it makes sense and that the timing is right. So I think I think just being aware that relationships is really, really critical to booking speaking engagements, and also acknowledging that relationships take time. I would say one other thing on that is one of the best ways to build relationships is to meet people in person. And so even if that means that you're doing free speaking, a free workshop here or there, Mike, you and I kind of knew of each other beforehand, but we spent a week together at an event, and it changes the dynamic of the relationship. I talk Mike up all the time and think the world of Mike because we spent a lot of time together, right? Versus like, oh yeah, I read that guy's blog one time, or I heard his podcast, and I've heard some people who said he's a good dude. It's a very different dynamic than I've met that person, I respect that person, I trust that person. I would have zero hesitation to, if I was hosting an event, to put Mike on stage because of that relationship. And so I think that relationship forms in person, and that's where, again, speaking even at some events, even for free, may make sense because it may lead to something down the road.
Yeah, and it comes back to that perseverance and understanding. I think, like you said before, some events, they run once a year, they book speakers once a year, and so sometimes it is just timing. I know, again, with Tropical Think Tank, this year was the last one Chris had done, and again, similar to yourself, we'd cross paths at some events. I'd worked with them with Upreneur, but there was never an expectation of anything. There was never an ask. Just so happened that somebody let Chris down and backed out of TTT, and so he looked back at past years, looked at what sessions people had been most interested in. Memberships came up, and that, okay, I've got a relationship with a guy who I know will nail it for memberships. So there you go. But if the last time recurring revenue was mentioned at TTT came up, it bombed, then I'm probably not getting that email from Chris, because he'll be looking for someone to fulfill a different need that I don't meet. And then I would never have spoken to TTT because he's moving back to the UK and not doing it again. Right. So so much of it is just time and not trying to rush it. Right. I think. Yep. So I mean, you've already laid down a lot of awesome advice. Value bombs, to steal Chris Ducker's word, since he's the unofficial sponsor of this episode. That happens on quite a few of these episodes. He comes up.
He stalks us long distance.
Yeah, more often than I would like. So before we wrap up, have you got any last pieces of parting advice or wisdom for anyone out there trying to make their name as a speaker? Maybe something that nobody's talking about, maybe something to watch out for, something to keep in mind. Some last words.
Yeah, I would just to kind of like summarize everything we've said. I think having realistic expectations of what you want speaking to do for you. I think again another thing we kind of touched on earlier is being clear on how you want speaking to fit into your business. So, there's some people that I know that are primarily a coach that want to speak, and so make sure then that your marketing materials reflect that. So if I come to your site and it's like, well, I see that they coach and they speak and they got a book and they got a membership site and they got all these different things, it becomes very, very confusing. I don't know what all it is that you do. And so I think it's really important, especially if you're in a service-based business, to really determine what's the primary hat that you wear. If you go to a local fast food place, a burger place, the burgers are probably going to be the centerpiece. And then you've got some other oh yeah, we do have fries. Oh yeah, we do have milkshakes, but the burgers, this is the main thing that we do. This is the main thing that we offer. And so I think you have to figure out what is speaking for you. Is it the burger? Is it the fries? Is it the secondary thing or further down the line? Or is it no, speaking is the primary thing that we do. And as a result, then make sure that your marketing materials are reflecting that. So I would say that. The other thing too, just to piggyback on the other thing we talked about towards the end here, is the speakers that I noticed that have a really difficult time getting traction and finding and booking speaking engagements, it's because they're really vague on who they speak to and what they speak about. I speak to anybody and everybody, and you just kind of become this generalist that's the jack of all trades, and you just don't want to. You don't want to be that person as a speaker. I think the reason that you and I have got some traction, not just from a speaking perspective, but just in business in general, is you and I are very, very specific about. I help speakers, and I help speakers specifically, primarily on their business. How do you find and book speaking engagements, right? Now, I could say, well, I help speakers. Oh, yeah, and I also help coaches and consultants and authors and yada, 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 yada. You focus on membership sites, right? You could say, well, we do membership sites and courses and webinars and Facebook ads and all these other things. But no. The more niched you are, the easier it is to say, oh yeah, Mike's the go-to person on this. Grant's the go-to person on that. Instead of trying to be this, this generalist. If I, God forbid, need to get brain surgery, I want to find who's the person that all they do is brain surgery. I don't want to find the guy that's like, oh yeah, I took a class on that one time in med school. I guess I could probably do it. I remember doing that on a dummy. Like I don't want to find that guy. I want to find the guy like, no, brain surgery is what I do day in and day out.
Yeah.
And so the same thing is true with speaking. Really position yourself and put your flag in the ground as I am the go-to authority on this. Now, I'll say one other thing. And sometimes we have this expert myth that, well, I'm not an expert. There's plenty of people that know more about the subject or topic than I do. But remember, you don't have to be the world's greatest expert on a certain subject or topic in order to speak on it. There's plenty of people that know more about the topic than you do. That's okay. But the audience, if you know more about the subject or topic than the audience does, they perceive you as the expert. Quick example I like to use is I know nothing about cars. I'm clueless with cars. If I take my car to get the oil changed, whoever's changing my car to me or changing the oil to me, that person's the expert because they know more about cars than I do. Does that mean that they're the world's greatest expert on cars? No. I know that. They know that. But I'm not looking for the world's greatest expert. I'm looking to this one person who's working on my car. If I'm sitting in a workshop session, I know something about membership sites, but I don't know as much as Mike. So to me, Mike is the expert. Whereas Mike, you might be going like, well, I know plenty of people who know way more about membership stuff than I do, or know more about this specific plugin, or know more, whatever. You may see them as the expert, but I'm not looking to those people. I'm looking to Mike. Mike's the go-to expert to me. So again, know that you don't have to be the world's greatest expert on this thing. There's plenty of people that may know more about it than you do. But as long as you're the person that the audiences view you as the expert, then expertise is really in the eye of the beholder. If they view you as the expert, then that's ultimately what makes it so.
Such important advice. And it applies not just in your speaking, but to running a membership, blogging, podcasting, and all that sort of stuff, especially something that's my biggest bugbear about staying specific, staying on niche or niche. It's niche.
Whatever it is.
Like staying on it. I think, definitely without question, and you mentioned it before, a big part of the success we've been able to enjoy is because we have been ferociously targeted and specific around our topic. And a mistake I see people making over and over again in all sorts of walks is as soon as they get any form of success within their speciality, they move to the middle of the road and they try to then be all things to all people. Right. And inevitably in the online space, that means they're doing their Gary V impression or the latest thing, which is the anti-Gary V impression.
Right.
And it's just, stay in your lane and stay persistent with it, because everything we covered on this show, I think, backs up. If you're specific, if you know what you're doing, if it's targeted, if you make it as easy as possible for people to book you, you stand a far greater chance of being successful in speaking and just in business in general.
Very much so.
That's awesome. Grant, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've loved our chats. If any of our listeners want to get more insight into public speaking, especially the business side, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, I'll give you two websites. One is if people want to know more in depth on just a plan on how to find, kind of step-by-step system on how to find and book speaking engagements. We have a free online webinar people can check out over at freespeakerworkshop.com, freespeakerworkshop.com. People can check that out. The other thing too is other site is thespeakerlab.com, thespeakerlab.com. So we've got a podcast over there. Mike is making an appearance on in the near future, and as well as several free blog posts and just stuff you can check out if you're looking for just some I'm intrigued by speaking and want to just dig around a little bit more. Then plenty of resources there, again, over at freespeakerworkshop.com and thespeakerlab.com.
Awesome. And obviously we'll have all the links and all that good stuff over in the show notes page at themembershipguys.com. Grant, once again, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.
Thanks again to Grant for coming on the show. Really enjoyed being able to just chat to him for a bit about the subject of public speaking. He's a great guy, a great speaker, and he really knows his stuff about public speaking. Not just the stuff you do on stage, but everything that surrounds it in terms of making it a key part of your business. And as someone who speaks but wouldn't necessarily call themselves a speaker, he's definitely changed my thinking about how I approach public speaking too, as we strive to use it as a way of raising our profile, of establishing ourselves as the authorities in the membership space, and of growing our business. So hopefully you found this useful. If you're not in the public speaking space, then maybe this has given you a little bit of motivation to get into it and to start using it for growing your business. Or if you are on the circuit, if you're doing a lot of public speaking, then hopefully you've been able to pick up some pointers that'll help you to get even more from the speaking that you're doing. And of course, if you want more from Grant, head on over to thespeakerlab.com and check out his free workshop at freespeakerworkshop.com. That's it for this week. Thanks again for spending a little bit of time with me. Hopefully you enjoyed this show, and we'll be back again next week with another episode of the Membership Guys podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode of the Membership Guys podcast, we invite you to check out the membersiteacademy.com. The Member Site Academy is the essential resource for anyone at any stage of starting, growing, and running a membership website. So whether you're still figuring out what your idea is going to be, or whether your website is already up and running and you're just looking for ways to grow it and attract new members, then the Member Site Academy can help you to get to the next level. With our extensive course library, monthly training, exclusive member-only discounts, perks and tools, and a supportive, active community to help you along the way with feedback, encouragement and advice, the Member Site Academy is the perfect place to be for anyone looking to start, manage and grow a successful membership website. So check it out at membersiteacademy.com.